Baseline.
You don't want to be busy but bored. You want to be, satisfied from a discovery perspective. It's like in the same way, like why we like watching new films and reading new books. It's something new to discover.
Baseline is designed to create an emotional response.
I've seen things you won't believe.
More human than human.
Make you question everything.
One of the things that used to frustrate me about going to like a technology innovators talk on blockchain, they tended to describe what blockchain was, how it could work, and didn't really focus on, okay, what is it for you? Why should you be adopting it? And you could always see the audience thinking, oh, I've got a database that does that, or I've got a process that does that already. Like, why would I change that? And it's hard to develop. It's not, it's not as fast as my fastest databases, these sorts of things. And I think that was the challenge. It was looking for that opportunity, that way in. And it was more entrepreneurial than it was, right, this is the problem that we're trying to solve, and then this is the solution. It doesn't necessarily have to be a blockchain-only solution. It was more probably hybrid, how it works with other technologies, how you adopt it, and so forth. But today, you see, like in supply chain provenance, there's good opportunities there. I think it even has a future when it comes to AI as well, especially when you think about like agentic AI. So your agent will go out and find information about, maybe it's your government records, your passport details, or your driving license information. Somewhere you're going to want a record of that. And an immutable location for that, i.e. blockchain, might be a good solution for that when it's cross-agent interactions. I think one of the things that challenging for the blockchain market, and again, it kind of implicates broader, capital-driven markets, was the investor side of it. Like a lot of blockchain organizations did benefit from VC backing, for sure, because there was great promise. Any VC has an index of risk that they will deal with. So they have some sure bets, and they have some longer term high transaction performing opportunities that may not be a sure bet, in the riskier side of their portfolio. And I think blockchain was somewhere in the middle, and then it started to get to the top of that risk tree. But with the initial coin offerings and all of the ways that blockchain companies could start to generate their own capital through coin offerings and so forth, it gave them this abundance of capital that perhaps the scrutiny of a VC, the value that a VC can bring as well, and you saw that kind of supply side proliferate. And equally, as we go into like the AI market, a lot of blockchain organizations are looking at that opportunity and saying, well, maybe there's a play for us there as well. So that, again, there might be a future for it, I think, but there's so many variables in that path to market, and it's not a total solution. It's a part of a solution, I think. I mean, I think that's what we'll continue to see going out, but it's still there. There's still innovation going on.
I find it a very, I still find it a very hard technology to define, and I think it's because there are so many varied applications of the technology, and even now, you look at YouTube, right? And you're looking at the way YouTube is training AIs based on content that people upload to it.
Right.
So just last week we did a video on, there's a tick box whether you allow third parties to train their AIs on your content. And I kind of did a video advising people to switch that off because, you're putting this work into creating content. Do you really want it to become something that's training someone else's AI without that unticked? You're effectively giving away copyright to your information. And somebody rightly commented that, well, Google aren't a third party. They're taking what you upload and training their AI on it.
Yeah.
So, then you think to yourself, well, how do you get ownership into the creator's hands so they can truly benefit from that. Okay, then you start thinking about the concepts of decentralization and maybe some form of decentralized video platform where creators own their content. And then you go down the route of, okay, how do we secure that mathematically, algorithmically? It's starting to look a lot like some sort of Bitcoin application for video assets.
Right.
And then you get bored of your own thinking because you realize it's too confusing with cryptocurrency. Who's going to market it? Decentralized marketplaces just don't seem to work because there's no single person driving them. Google already have the incumbent ownership of that space with YouTube. And that whole thought process that happens, in 5 minutes on a bike ride, you could apply to, any of the enterprise applications of blockchain when you saw that problem of ownership and the realization of value and transparency, whether it's airplane supply chain, pharmaceutical data, clinical trials, video ownership, but it just doesn't happen. It just doesn't seem to happen.
I think that's the thing. Like, you could sit back and think, a lot of those opportunities that were investigated, that we started to bear fruit in, they weren't wrong. They were good fit. It's just that there was probably too many multiple types of barriers in the way. And one of the things, like with the example of the YouTube incumbency, there's just easier alternatives that don't require real thought, investment, training. If I can just upload my video to YouTube, maybe I'm okay with Google, etc., using my information in the same way that you and I are probably quite happy to give away our email address and socials just to get a bit of free Wi-Fi at the airport. That exists, that kind of behavior. And I think that's the thing as well with when you think about like the consumer side of the world. The stratification in terms of behaviors is just so varied. And even if it was to come down to, using your example of a alternative to YouTube where there is privacy baked in, that it isn't going to allow third parties to use that information for training AIs or whatever purposes, reselling that data for other purposes, there's probably a place for the market for that. But is it going to be as big as YouTube? Possibly not. And that's the beauty of it. That there can be that variability. But I think if you are a technology provider looking to build that kind of capability, the barriers that you're facing is not only your alternatives, but is monetization important to you? What level of monetization? Who's going to reward you for that? Who's going to keep funding that model? And that's the challenging aspect of it. I mean, we can't ignore that a lot of consumer technology that we work with is funded by advertising revenue.
Are we in a post-privacy era? I get the alerts from Apple telling me that 150 of my passwords have been compromised. Do you want to work through them all individually and changing them? And I'll look at these things I logged onto 5-6 years ago. Yes, there's good, password hygiene and we're moving through. But the general population, do they care?
I think, define general population, isn't it? I mean, I always tend to think of like my parents, for example, that will absolutely care about that. They'll look at that and they'll find that quite fear-inducing, if you like. But perhaps my niece, as we were talking earlier, 18, perhaps less so, because it's just part of life, that will happen, and they'll go on, they'll move their passwords on to something else. As long as my most frequently used accounts aren't compromised, I don't really care about that time that I bought, a cake from my local bakery and I used the same password there that I did on my Gmail. I'll just change my Gmail password. So I think the behavior of it is again very, very stratified. And I think thinking just from like a Western perspective as well, you look around the world as well, and it's entirely different. Once again, if we were to go to countries where privacy preservation laws are completely different, like we have in dictatorships and so forth, then huge populations live under those controls, and they kind of you would expect rejection, but not so much in some of those locations because they have no alternative to it. So I think, are we
Are they
beyond
better
privacy
worlds,
now?
do you think? Are they better worlds? I watched, have you seen Bold and Bankrupt?
I have not, no.
Amazing. It's this guy who travels, he spent a lot of time in Russia, Kazakhstan, he was in Ukraine. He goes out to edgy places to get the reality of the world. There's another guy on YouTube who rides this electric bike and he's been doing it around the California wildfires. It's fascinating to see the reality. I mean, horrendous what's going on out there, but fascinating to see what's actually going on. So Bold and Bankrupt, he did one in China. And he travelled across China, no cash, this Alipay, really gets into the cultural, and I can totally see the benefits in that level of surveillance and control about every aspect of your life, controlling crime and controlling edge cases of behaviour. Do you think that's a better life? I mean, you're sacrificing freedoms for safety, I suppose.
Yeah, it's hard to say, isn't it? Because you speak to Chinese citizens, and some of them, it's just totally accepted that that's the way life is. And some, we can't pretend that there aren't people that come from outside of China and go and live there, and they make their compromises with that style of life. Whether it's happy or not, I don't know. But I think what it does serve is a really good example of how, with increased surveillance, we have to expect increased surveillance, even in the city of London or wherever, better observation through computer vision in cameras around CCTV. There's a huge benefit to public safety from that perspective, but it comes at the cost of increased surveillance and trusting that the organisations that are in charge of it aren't using it for nefarious purposes, which chances are they won't. But also, we're back to potentially data monetisation again. We're back to how is that anonymised and aggregated? Is it anonymised and aggregated? And that's the difficult part. I think when we think about AI in general and the adoption potential, you got to break it down into obviously technology will innovate. It will get more intelligent. It will get better at reasoning. It will get better cognition. But the application and acceptance of it, that's going to be the element that's going to either accelerate or decelerate the adoption. I think, if we were to shrink it down to a policeman or a policewoman wearing a body-worn camera that has some form of computer vision. Right now it's surveying. It's surveying absolutely everything that's being done for use at a later time. But with today, computer vision can get over the video analytics part of it, i.e. I don't have to put a resource in a room to sit and watch hours and hours of surveillance information because I've got computer vision that's doing the analytics for me and can identify perhaps a particular individual has walked across that. And it's non-discriminatory in that sense. It doesn't care about the collection of pixels that happen to be other people in that image. It's just looking for that particular collection of pixels that is the thing that I've asked it to look for. And that's where it starts to get difficult because the technology itself, it doesn't have an opinion. It's following instructions. But who gives the instructions is the challenging part of it.
Errol, this is fascinating. On a number of conversations, we've talked about bias. But the way you're describing it, and I haven't thought about it this way before, is that it's the data that's making the decisions in a very explicit way. It's not saying, this is a male of a certain age wearing a certain clothing or what. It's saying this is matching.
Correct. Yeah.
This is whether it's the way they walk, the face that that it's a pixelated match of a data set that is known objectively to be a risk or a certain expected behavior.
Yeah.
So there's no argument for bias in that case.
Yeah, it's gonna identify things that you told it to identify, or perhaps where the bias starts to come in from a computer perspective is that it's following behavioural traits. And let's perhaps take it away from the public safety example and go into like a retail environment. So today, if you pick up a smart scanning barcode reader on your way into a shop, a lot of people do that now to avoid the queues. Every now and then it will ask you at the end of your shop, we need to scan like 5 or 6 items to make sure you haven't put any quality street in there that you shouldn't have done so. Part of that algorithm for part of the retailers is it's tracking your whereabouts around the store. So if you browsed in a particular location, let's say it's beers, wines and spirits, but you didn't scan any booze, it might flag that and say, actually, chances are they've put a bottle of whiskey or something in their basket. So let's check that on the way out. So you're kind of buying into, without knowing it, that there is this overseeing. It's not just the security guard at the front door, but the machine is tracking you. And then that's the thing when it comes to behavioral. So if 9 times out of 10, the individual that hovers around BWS doesn't scan anything and then gets found with the bottle of whiskey, that's now a trait that the machine has learned. That's the behavioral side of it. So everyone that does that, chances are they might get that scan. And that's different to a human saying, please look for that person in amongst that crowd, that collection of pixels. It's saying that probabilistically that there's a good chance that someone might have popped in their Christmas drinks as part of that browsing. And then it kind of goes beyond that, because you can see in that scenario, like, I don't know about you, but there's a Amazon Fresh shop near me. And you walk into that and you know that cameras are going to be on you, because the goal is that you can just walk out and you don't have to go through a transaction system. It's picked what you've picked off the shelves and it's going to charge you later. By the way, they're really brilliant for, like, if you want to return a package to Amazon, go straight there. It's very, very fast. But they're not the busiest shops on the high street, because there's a proportion of the population that don't buy into that. That they'll go to their local Tesco, or they'll go to their local convenience shop or whatever it is, knowing that there isn't a million cameras on them. And that was the conversation that we had with a lot of retailers, i.e., if we implement that, we can reduce shrinkage, i.e. their term for people popping things in their pockets and walking out without paying it. But the cost of that is that the consumers themselves, go back to my parents, they probably don't want to go to a shop where there's a million cameras on them, not because they're going to steal something, they just don't like that. They're uncomfortable with that scenario. And that's where it can kind of work against you in those senses. But then again, now if we were to take that example and go even further and say, okay, now it's a medical device that I'm holding in a hospital that's going to scan you, it's going to take pictures of you. That's where we want that probabilistic algorithm to say, well, there's a high chance that 90 times that we've scanned that mole, that it's turned out to be problematic, that needs investigation. That's the kind of computer vision, positive behavioral detection. But perhaps the application of it in our daily lives, aside from physical security, in our CCTV environment in London to stop people getting mugged, etc. That's the barriers to adoption, the kind of societal acceptance of the use of that technology. But yeah, it kind of comes down to, there is unbias in the machine. Bias can be brought in, and there's always bias in people. And that's where, like, the ethical side of all this becomes very, very complicated. It's almost like what we term a wicked problem, that there's so many variables within it. And then, ideally, AI would be used to help solve some of those wicked problems. So whether it's like, the obesity crisis, or, other issues that we haven't got good solutions for, or the cost of failure is very high because they're just so complicated and nuanced. So that was a bit of a long answer to a fairly simple
in a very
question.
excited way, we've got stuck into it. I think we were just about to introduce your title.
Oh, yeah.
Because
I get paid to talk for a living, Ian, so this happens.
there is no money being swapped hands today, Errol, just so you're aware. There is no money in podcasting, I don't think. But listen, you're already into it. But the reality is, of all the people I've met in the last 20 years, every conversation I've had with you, I remember back in Fitzrovia, around this idea of emerging trends in technology. I've always remembered, Errol.
Yeah.
I've always remembered.
Yeah.
I'm trying to work out whether you just beat me into submission or it's just so profound and insightful what you say. So it's very exciting to talk about this. You know,
Thank you.
we've already covered, you know, blockchain and its kind of a few false starts, but it's still in the background. But maybe from a Gartner perspective, or, you know, your personal perspective, this idea of emerging technologies research, like what do you do to kind of look into the next 12, 24 months, 5 years? Like, you know, part of the conversations I had was we were asking people, where is AI going to be in 50 years? That feels like almost a ridiculous question now, because things are emerging so much quicker.
Yeah.
Are you seeing that? Are you seeing that acceleration in emergence? What are the signs of things changed in the last 20 years about how technology emerges? You know, and looking at ChatGPT, how that's just kind of come out of, you know, in a 12-month period.
Yeah.
That's gone from being something that, you know, was a early transformer technology to probably being used by most people.
Yeah, and everyone knows what it is. You know, it's like entered the psyche like nothing else has done so in at least recent history, I think. I mean, maybe like the .com boom, everyone kind of knew what that stood for back then. But yeah, it's interesting actually, because since the emerging tech practice that I work in today has existed at Gartner for about 5 years. Prior to that, it was quite diffused across Gartner. So, you know, there were areas of our research, because we were kind of aligned to, you know, organizational units that we would support, so like the CIO organization, perhaps industry groups, tech market segments, and so forth. And you can imagine some parts would move faster with emerging technology adoption than others. But recently, we made this decision to consolidate it in one place. And one of the questions that we ask ourselves is this an observer effect, that the pace of emerging technology investment and innovation has accelerated in that time? Because, you know, 5 years ago, it's 2020, so just before the pandemic started. And I think there are a couple of things that happened during that period that changed a little bit or accelerated the appetite around emerging technology. Because if you go back to the previous decade, I mean, going back to sort of 2008, 2009, everything slowed down because of the economic crisis. And then it was around that same sort of time that cloud computing came into its zenith. And it was quite an interesting journey for that. You know, Amazon Web Services realizing that they could resell excess capacity, you know, from their book retail store. Who would have thought it? And a lot of others, you know, followed suit, you know, competed, innovated around that. And it really unlocked capabilities. You know, back then we were worried about data centers running out of space, you know, having to build new data centers because everything was on-prem. And then all of a sudden it kind of unlocked this capability. And then the pendulum swung in the opposite direction. You know, sort of 2015, 2016, we were talking about cloud sprawl. We've got too much of it. It's hard to manage. And that's Jevons paradox in play. And what Jevons paradox is that the lower cost of utility, the more tendency there is for wastage. So going from, I had to ask my IT department to go and buy, you know, a 2 CPU server for like $7,000, $8,000, $9,000 US, and it taking 6 to 8 weeks to get that in or get it commissioned, to I can do it within an hour by provisioning it in the cloud. It kind of unlocked this capability. And what cloud brought, it wasn't just like the servers and the storage that were available to us. It allowed software companies to deliver their software, not on a DVD that you would install, but as a cloud service, software as a service, right? It unlocked the world to software as a service. And that was the first sort of glimmer of, well, we can make decisions faster. We can trial capabilities in my organization, and I can switch it off tomorrow. Like you and I, if we get sick of Netflix, we can switch it off tomorrow and have a break for a few months, but then we can switch it back on.
There's no 5-year depreciative commitment to a phase of technology.
Exactly.
If everything, and I suppose this is probably mirroring the way software development was being built. We were moving to agile.
That's right.
Moving away from, 12-month software project to 2-week sprints, so everything was moving to this higher frequency of consumption.
Yeah.
And therefore reducing its perceived value. Was this the Jevons paradox?
I think the Jevons paradox predominantly for me speaks to the sprawl. The wastage part of it is the key terminology there. But for business users, they didn't think it was waste. They thought it was experimentation. That we can, I'm in HR and I want to try this new HR solution. I can do it for a month. And it's no problem. For an enterprise adopter, it wasn't wastage for them. It was experimentation, and it unlocked the keys to what we used to call agility. That I could turn something on and turn something off if I didn't like it. And equally, if I wanted to compare and contrast my shortlist vendors, I could actually do that now. I could have a 30-day trial. Still is Tuesday, and I think that was the catalyst to where we got to when it came to lockdown. And my favourite example of lockdown was, and that's a horrible phrase to say, but from an emergent technology perspective, because it was difficult for very, very, very many people, myself included. But let's get past that. From an emergent technology perspective...
Errol, is everybody PTSD? Is everybody suffering trauma from lockdown?
I think so. I think so on a personal level. It's like the snap in Marvel Cinematic Universe. There's like this period where everything kind of stopped from our personal lives perspective. And I don't know about you, but I have sort of vague memories of those 2 years. There's like little bits that pop up, but there's a long period of, maybe it's just routine, that gets coded in a way in our brains that it doesn't strike out. I don't know about you, like if I'm scrolling through my photos on my phone, I'm like, oh yeah, I did that. I completely forgot that we'd done anything like that, because it wasn't a highlight like going on a holiday or being able to see family and things like that. I think, it's maybe people have, I've certainly compartmentalized that part of my life. And I think perhaps it makes you focus on what you have today a little bit more and being grateful for that. Taking away those freedoms to just travel outside of your, outside of walking distance from your home. Yeah, it's even talking about it now, it brings back some strange memories.
What are those? What's when you think about that era? What's that residual thought?
Got a lot of value out of streaming services. I know that. But actually, I can bring that back to.
But that is like, if you think about it, the way we consume media has fundamental. So if I look at the big trends that you see at the moment, which is the total dismantling and lack of trustworthiness and increased transparency on political agenda within legacy media, that is really apparent now. Like the pre-COVID, when I looked across different newspapers and that, I didn't really see them as political voices. Whereas you look at them now, they're political voices.
Absolutely.
And I think about, so that's one element, the way media consume, your point on streaming services, media's just different now. You look at health. I was thinking about your example with stealing whiskey. Like today, these days, people will be stealing probably, Gillette razors and, high protein products.
Oh, yeah.
The focus on, preservatives in foods and that whole industry seems to be crumbling in front of us right now. So you think media, foods, and then you look at, the hospitality industry, that sort of thing, massively struggled since. And it's as if people haven't reverted. I mean, I don't drink alcohol anymore. I try to stay healthy.
Same,
I do a lot more. I don't watch, I've completely removed the BBC from my house and view, because of it. So I look back at then, it was highly traumatic. And then sometimes I speak to people and they're like, well, they felt as though they dropped into this parallel existence where they, they got help. But, what happened?
It's that I think it's a really good point about the kind of media consumption as well, in the sense that when like just talk about the UK, I mean, you would watch the BBC News and you'd have a high level of trust in it, and you'd have a high level of confidence that it was limited, if not zero bias in the reporting. And then problematically, we've had all sorts of things come to light where there has been bias and there has been agendas, and the BBC is held to a higher standard. But the problem is that in the rest of the media sphere, let's call it, and there's a spectrum, right? There's very, very reliable sources, then there's biased sources, and then there's bad actors. I think there's a large proportion of the population that put the same level of trust in the bad actor sources, as well as the biased sources, as well as the unbiased sources, and treats, like we always talk about what's on Facebook and that being treated as being truth, whereas perhaps it's not a reliable source. And that's where it starts to get dangerous, when someone can see, quite frankly, an AI-generated video that is full of falsisms and falsehoods, but can be very convincing in its style, in its replication of reality and so forth, that people will take it as read, and then it becomes part of their consciousness. So I think, maybe being so used to consuming a broader variety of content today, that perhaps span from, but I think maybe it's a continuum. Like perhaps we were heading in that direction anyway, and during that period of lockdown, during that period of COVID crisis, that it just accelerated. The rhetoric started to become more diverse and spirited, let's say. And I think everyone can probably think of a story where they're shaking their head, thinking, "No, you've got it wrong. Don't listen to that source." Whether you're on, an extreme of one view, or in the center, or in the extreme of another view, everyone's got that perspective.
The frustration for me is, and I was watching the Mark Zuckerberg, Joe Rogan one last week. Zuckerberg was under immense pressure in the US, and I think came out as being a highly political bias, censorship and control at Facebook to the left, to the to the democratic function when it was in power. And for me, Errol, what I want is political neutrality in these digital platforms, where they're not presenting a bias, subconsciously or consciously biased view, just neutrality. You're a tech platform to help people communicate and be community and be connected. Right? Don't get into shaping it. And I thought maybe there's an opportunity here for Mark Zuckerberg and Facebook to relive that neutrality. But when you look under the covers, like they've appointed Dana White, who I like, but is clearly a component of now the Republican Power Party as part of Facebook. Zuckerberg's moved to Texas and he's like doing MMA, and he's almost a parody now of swinging from one political agenda to another. And for me, it's slightly disappointing, because I saw this as an opportunity to become a neutral platform for digital community engagement, and irrelevant of my own personal political views, whether they sit on the right or the left or somewhere else. It's just those platforms following the power. It comes across as slightly weak and disingenuous.
I think you've nailed it there, though. It's following the power. Maybe they'll swing and buff it based on creating success for their own companies. Perhaps it's disappointing in a way. For these are resources that you and I grew up using, and the nature that it's changed. And I think it's a real comment. And I always used to question the visibility of like the tech CEOs when it was for their organization and what they were trying to achieve. I'm trying to sell more cloud services or web services or ERP or whatever it is. I kind of get that. But then when it's sort of to branch over into the political regimes, because they've got a platform and then they're using their voice. And that's, perhaps in their mind it's separating the individual from the organization, but I don't think the public see it as that. They see it as one thing. And what does that future look like?
I was going to say, how in your role of supporting organizations objectively assess emerging technologies, how in your role is this idea that big tech is bigger than government? How do you factor that into assessing emerging technologies when it's not just about technology, it's infused into our very belief system and structure of governance?
Yeah, and the job that we have is to identify the early signals. That is our job. Whether it's innovation coming out of the lab, whether it's going into early adoption. And early adoption in our view is when it crosses the chasm up to sort of 15, 16% target market adoption. But even Moore himself is saying there's a second chasm. So beyond that first crossing the chasm, when things are supposed to get hard, when you get into early majority adoption, there's another chasm that occurs. And I think that's part of that complexity. But how we help organizations overcome that, in some senses, it's quite selfish. Or quite focused in a way, because we can observe what the market trends are, but realistically, when you're speaking to the CIO of a retail organization, it's really about what these technologies and capabilities can do for you and how it benefits your organization, your customers. So the broader construct of it has context, but perhaps not necessarily a direct effect. I think where that's going to come into place is where, like, the predictions about how the next 5 or 10 years look like. So in a way, we would like to say that it's almost like the classic IT panacea, that everything talks to everything, everything's going to get along, and everything is going to be like this seamless, powered by artificial intelligence and agentic AI in particular, future. But realistically, what we're looking at, and we're already seeing a bit of a dichotomy today. So you've got your small domain-specific model providers, and these are focused on a process or a particular professional role, like HR, sales, finance, bookkeeping, etc. These are models that are right-sized for those specific purposes. And then you've got your large language models, which will become large world models or large human models that are more top-down, the big bang, where the big bucks really pay dividends to get very, very large, complex models. And ideally, agentic AI will help us to transgress both of those worlds. There will be a multi-agent, multi-model, multimodal world.
Do you know, I was speaking to Hugh Jones last week. He does intelligent products at Lloyd's banking group, and he introduced me to this idea of Fifi Lee's large world model, and the evolution of then into multimodal world models that go beyond language. They go into sensory. And as I was drinking my coffee this morning, I was thinking about how Siri and voice assistants are now evolving to conversational AI. Multimodal world models remind me a little bit of how virtual reality, as we used to call it, which was pre-built coded three-dimensional constructs, are going to move to multimodal AI systems that absorb our sensories. It's like Siri and virtual reality are like the first generations of these highly intelligent multimodal systems in which we will exist. It's fascinating.
That's a really good sort of.
But every time I see people in the screens, I just think it's highly dystopian, and we're losing that physical connection. That's where.
Yeah, your head's in a box at the end of the day, isn't it?
Well, go do. I didn't mean to interrupt.
No.
The large world model is just an amazing concept that seems to, again, emerging very quickly, Errol.
Yeah, and what avenue is going to, what ring will rule them all in that sense? Will it be these super complex large world models that will take years to develop and lots of capital and lots of power to run and so forth? Or will it be these collection of small models? And it's not a huge leap to say it's probably some mixture of both. But the problem that we've got, so you mentioned Siri, Alexa, our home Google assistants, etc. That tends to be our avenue into. So you can ask, for example, Alexa or Siri or whatever to turn on your lights. or to turn off your heating. And those are two different vendors that make that. The interesting thing is that there's a standard called Matter, right? That is the comm standard where some of the biggest companies in the world have got together and said, you know what, we're going to get our technology to be able to talk to each other. But you could equally see that to prevent a alternative provider coming in and stealing your, let's say, ERP or CRM supremacy, that you'll focus more on a vertically integrated stack. So you will use Einstein for everything in your CRM, Salesforce world, and you will limit access to other agents. And we've seen this before. So and this is the competitive nature of the industry that we work in. So when virtualization in infrastructure took off, VMware was the kind of first one there to say, okay, you know, you can manage servers not as physical instances, but as virtual instances. And technically, you could use VMware tools to manage your Microsoft estate and Microsoft to do VMware. But the thing was, you had to buy the premium platform or the premium service grade in order to unlock that part of the API. And what users found was like, well, I'll just use the tools that VMware provides because they're better for the VMware estate. And I'll use the tools that Microsoft provides for the Microsoft estate because they're better. And never the twain will meet. And that's the problem with the kind of vertically integrated stack in that way, is that there's always going to be benefits to that silo in a sense. So, you know, maybe it's like mobile phones today. We can both have WhatsApp downloaded on our phone, and you've got Google, I've got Apple, let's say. But there's specific applications on Google that I can't access through Apple. And then that entire stack that Google's created for Android, that entire stack that Apple's created for iPhones.
Will one company win the AI stack?
I think these are the signals that we look for that are markers for the change in the market. Possibly is the answer. And I think there's a lot of variables in there, because you can look at like the OpenAIs of the world, and a lot of people would probably say, yeah, that's probably where a lot of the, they've already talked about how many
I see them
parameters they're adding.
I see them fall on the side. When I look at the financial horsepower of Google, they're difficult to ignore in this case. And I think that there's a lot of AGI, ASI, Microsoft contractual problems. I've almost also seen some news articles destabilizing the leadership at OpenAI, whether they're true or not, it's kind of irrelevant. But there seems to be an effort to destabilize that business. And then I look at Google and its existential threat that search is done, and then the idea that they do own most of certainly the video content, YouTube, and the data on the internet, and they're making huge strides with Gemini and what's going on. Yeah, they've got to evolve.
And that's a really good point. Like, something has to change. Like OpenAI said, well, we're looking in for the for-profit model versus non-profit. So they're already seeing that there's a difference in the structure of their business that needs to be done in order for them to move forwards. And I like the Google example in particular, because there's a lot of money flowing through that. And we tend to, when we think of AI and AI adoption, we tend to think of like the banks adopting it, or government adopting it, industry, etc. But we forget about people like you and I. And you go to Google today, you can type in, find me this definition of ABC, and Gemini will provide you answers. And you're now not clicking through to those websites, because Gemini gives you 90% of what you need. And that's pretty good AI. It's good for most people. That's where the volume is. And
consumer generative AI.
And it doesn't, you compare that to like me and you using it for work. Like, it can summarize a few things for me, but me as an expert in my job, I need to go a little bit deeper. So the barrier to entry is different. Like, everyone will use the search engine version of generative AI and think it's pretty good, because it helps them navigate things faster. But using it in your job, that's a higher bar.
Well, your bank could just become an API off the back of your AI assistant.
You could see that.
So no longer would you interact with your bank directly. You would interact through your trusted personal AI generative AI-based assistant that is connected to a whole load of services. And therefore you have this agentic centralization of all the things you consume. Because be honest, if I had one app, and I like the one ring to rule them all, I thought that was an amazing, I love that. I really like that. Because I can kind of see in a very, the smartphone is the one ring to rule them all right now. The smartphone.
Your access into
But if the smartphone becomes disrupted by different ways of consuming digital technology, whether it's some augmentation or a wearable or something, if the smartphone is fundamentally removed as your control point, then an agentic AI instance that is connected through a trustworthy network to the services that you consume is going to start looking really compelling.
You could see it, couldn't you? Because like I like to use the Jarvis from Iron Man example a lot because I guess I'm a fan of Marvel. But I think that's like the panacea, that you've got this ultimate intelligent super agent that understands you, can do things for you, like the actuation, the agency that it has. And, Jarvis is a good example of where, it connects to lots of different third-party assets and so forth. But let's go back to your banking example. I could have the best Jarvis in the world. But if my bank says, no, we don't allow third-party agents to access your banking information, that's game over for Jarvis.
Good. How about if I say, I trust my agent so much, my digital agent, find me the bank that works.
That's the alternative.
The shift of power.
Yeah.
The shift of power.
And that's an excellent point.
And what happens if all those banks are in China, for example? So we're into like digital globalization at a true scale, where your bank used to be the building in your community that knew your generations. We moved in 2000 to internet banking, internet facing services, effectively SEO in Google or the search engine giving you if you were looking for a new financial service, you would search, and SEO would route you to an appropriate service, probably who's paying the most in advertising, etc. Well, if we then move to trusted agentic AI, that that is the thing that starts to find the services for you, and they could be truly global services.
Yeah.
Do you know? I mean, we're just thinking.
And that's
about
that's the spectrum
where that
of
control
trust,
point moves,
isn't it? Like you've got that's a super level of trust, and you probably won't give it the keys to your banking on day one. Like you're going to trust it to do other things first. Like today, agentic AI is all around us. I see you've got a smart thermostat. That's agentic AI. It's machine learning. It turns on your heating when it thinks you want it, and that's going to be again the high volume of agency today. It's going to be simple, special purpose agentic AI. But then once you start to aggregate all of your little agents around your house, then you get a home, agentic AI solution. And it's probably a network of smaller agents that all work together. And today, because of Matter, it helps with that fluidity of it. And I think that's the start of something in the home. Perhaps in the future, your home will be an extension of a primary healthcare facility, that it's going to, for hospitals and insurance companies, going to avoid you going to primary healthcare facilities, aka the hospital, but they can monitor you remotely. They can monitor your vital signs and so forth. You can see that there's probably a pathway forward to that, especially in the vulnerable, elderly, people that need in-home support. You can see that that's going to probably be an early adoption of it. But where it goes from there, and that's where the trust starts to change and get more complicated. I think, like going back to your earlier question, how do you advise organizations? You've got to plan for change. Don't get too embedded into particular scenarios, particular solutions. Have the cost of exit, have the path to exit as part of your strategy. And again, like what we were saying earlier, this kind of experimentation has changed, I think, the consciousness of a lot of IT buying organizations, even us as consumers. We think about it differently like we did many years ago. And I think, those two forces combined, if there's always going to be like the protectors in, let's talk about the bank. They're going to protect it, and they're going to say, our brand is built on safety and trust. Therefore, we will never let third-party AI touch your private information. Then there's going to be the disruptors at the other end of the spectrum that say, no, we will allow that because it's more about reducing your cost, increasing your investments, better access to information for your financial health, etc. And then you've got some people in the middle, like the evolutionary disruptors. And you'll see like the population start to make their calls. And where they start may not be where they end up. And that's the thing in the early signals business, is you've got to start to identify, if that starts to happen, who are the likely candidates to adopt it, where it goes from there. And that's the part of the prediction that is challenging, because it's a wicked problem. There's so many variables included in that. But what we can do to help organizations is to safeguard them from risk. Depending on their risk appetite, where should they place their bets? How should they architect for the future? And I think expecting change, expecting, in the enterprise, like the CIO should expect business units to come with their own solutions to say, my HR software company has its own embedded AI in it. That's the solution that I'm going to go with, regardless of what else is out there, because this is best fit for me now. It helps me pay my bills faster, identify fraudulent risk at a higher rate than I can today.
I just wonder, tying two things together, this whole point you're talking about, emergence, the one thing that doesn't change is the ongoing rolling aging and generational handover of human nature.
Yeah.
Generations are changing. And then we look at, the 15 to 18-year-olds who were in education at COVID time, during a very sensitive period of their, physical, mental, psychological development. They went through this quite traumatic period of not seeing friends, family, whatever. Has that created this marked shift, whether it's post-privacy era, whether it's digital first, whether it's high adoption of social media, maybe the lack of critical thinking, maybe increasing critical thinking, I don't know, but has that created something that, this idea of physical brands, logos on buildings, it's meaningless. We were talking about Canary Wharf earlier. I remember Citibank and HSBC being the two, massive physical monoliths of financial visibility and physical dominance of Docklands. Those two buildings were amazing, physical emblems of success. Well, guess what? They're both empty now. Nobody works there anymore. So the young people who are moving into consumerism, they have a totally different value set.
I was going to say, you walk around Canary Wharf at the weekend now, it's not a dead town. It's buzzing. And the restaurants, the shops, they're amazing. It's like a shopping destination now. It used to stand for, like you say, like that financial strength, tall, towering, physical embodiments of it. I guess it does still in a way, but there's a different side to Canary Wharf today. That financial environment. It wasn't that long ago when I was at university. You could come into the Square Mile in London and everything would be shut. That's today not the case. It's buzzing. You go into the Square Mile and pubs would be shut. Restaurants would be shut. That's now not the case today.
Do you know what I'm really enjoying today, Errol? You're really positive. Do you know what is going on?
Yeah.
Tell me about that. Because I sometimes get lost in this dystopian futurism of the replacement of human values with digital values. You're not there. You're somewhere else.
I guess there was. So fortunately we had Arnold Schwarzenegger to do a presentation at one of our events last year, and they asked him, and he's a great commentator on the human condition, I think, and a great motivator as well. Maybe this is why
in the panic
like
they tried to pull the plug.
Exactly.
I don't know whether that was any good or not, but it's as good as it's gonna get.
I liked it. I might do an impression for you in a second.
Please feel free.
They asked him. They said, are you fearful of artificial intelligence? And he said, no. That was the impression. No, it's human stupidity. And that's such a powerful thought because it's right on so many levels. And I think that's the thing, not necessarily that we need to worry about, but that's because on one side of it, you can't stop the machine. You can't stop, like, innovators will innovate. Companies will invest in innovative organizations. And it is very much field of dreams. You need to build this for it to become a reality. So for all of the things that we're talking about, like we were even half joking about virtual reality, maybe the reason that we're not both sitting here in VR goggles is because we haven't been told by the people that are building it what the compelling reason is for it. And I'm starting to see that now. Like, I saw an advert the other day where, if you're on a flight, short haul, long haul, whatever, put on your VR goggles and you've now got a cinema to watch your film rather than me trying to balance my phone on the tray table. I could see that. And so for those that have that kind of disposable income, maybe that's a good use case for it. I like it. And that's the thing, that we still need a vibrant supply side of innovation to continue, because if it doesn't get built, it's never, ever going to happen. But equally, it relies on people adopting it. And I think generally, as a human race, we are curious. And so, as we've talked about, like this underlying experimentation, like this art of the possible thinking, we're immersed in that, looking at the things that we look at. We don't have to deal with things like technical debt in my part of the business, because we're only looking at, like, that's new, that's interesting, what could it possibly change? And we are more interested in the revolution versus evolution. But again, so one of the examples that I like to use at the moment is the rise of the polyfunctional robot, the humanoid robot. A lot of people are talking about these. It helps that, like, with Elon Musk, with his robot doing that demonstration, and like other companies around the world, there's like real low cost robots coming out of China, $15,000 for a robot as a training program. And speaking to a really large manufacturer recently, they love them. And I wanted to get under that a little bit, because generally, like in the world of robotics, we know that a humanoid robot is subpar. Humans are generally good at everything, but we're not specialist in anything apart from, like, perhaps fine motor skills. But you don't have a humanoid robot making your chips. You have a very specific machine for that. On a production line for a vehicle assembly, you don't have a humanoid robot doing it. You have a very big robot doing spot welds and so forth. And they figured out where special purpose robots do well. But using that car analogy, it was 70s when coach building and traditional manufacturing got overturned upside down by the production line. And that was the revolution in the car industry. And those that didn't have a production line suffered because they couldn't do cost efficiency, etc. That's where robots, polyfunctional robots, are so attractive, because I don't have to redesign how my warehouse or manufacturing.
It's back to agility. You're not committing a physical investment that's going to last 5-10 years.
Yeah.
Multifunctional robot can adaptively dynamic to the evolution of the
in my hospital environment.
Process.
I can have a humanoid robot that's going to go and pick up stock for me. It's a very complicated task to go and get medication from a storeroom and bringing it out. Works 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, etc.
So you may sacrifice some short-term productivity for longevity of the platform.
And the problem is rethinking, like, how a hospital layout should look like. That's tough. Who's got time and space?
So therefore, robots need to reflect the form factor of the human.
Yeah.
To fit into existing.
Yeah, you could just drop them in, go for it. But rethinking that entirely, who's got time and space to redesign
the size
that?
of a door, the height of a step.
Do you even need doors and steps and these sorts of things anymore? Like, what does that environment look like? And so that's why you see these point solutions so successful. And that's why AI has been so good, because it's really good at summarization. It's really good at hoovering up broad swathes of information that is generally helpful to me as a consumer.
Do you live your role? Do you live your job, Errol? You must be doing a phenomenal amount of thinking about this 24 hours a day to have this level of
I'm very
vision.
lucky in that the role that I have, not only do we get to speak to our customers are generally interested in this and have money to throw at it, whether they're building the technology, adopting the technology, and we help those that are interested and just having like big picture thinking. And I think like the art of the possible conversations have increased in volume. But equally, I've got a big team of analysts whose only job it is to think about this stuff. And I'm in a luxurious position where I get to speak to all of them. And that's the most fun part of my job. I had just literally Friday, I had a 30-minute catch up with one of my analysts. We had a 2-hour discussion on this, and we're just ideating. And what comes out of it is like, okay, let's go and investigate that a little bit more. Let's go and try and prove if that's true. Let's find some more organizations that think about that from an innovation procedure perspective in their organizations. Let's see if this exists. And that's the fun part of the job. It really is. So a lot of people ask us, particularly in Gartner, what tool is it that you use to find these innovations and assess them? And there is no tool. We are the tool. Every one on my team, myself included, we have Sherlock Holmes hats, and we put them on and we do the hard work. We get out, we speak to the VCs, we speak to the innovators, we speak to the adopters, and then we bring all of that information back and we discuss it and we figure out what we're going to prioritize to spend our time on that is going to be most important for our clients. And you can imagine just that. The thing I like about my job as well, there's no ego in it as well, because 20 years of industry experience in X or Y matters less when you're only thinking about the future, what comes next. And we're all on this sort of journey of discovery together. So that's a really fun part of the job in that sense. And that's probably what keeps me happy, actually, because it's all new. It's all, if you think about, like I say, people are genuinely curious. That's the thing that lights me up, is that you don't want to be busy but bored. You want to be satisfied from a discovery perspective. It's like in the same way, like why we like watching new films and reading new books. It's something new to discover. And luckily, that's a big part of my day-to-day. So yeah, I mean, honestly, I don't talk about it much with my friends and family because they're more cynical than I am a lot of the time, and just saying like, how does this affect my day-to-day life? And my Xbox still works the same way. I don't know what you're talking about. So yeah, you got to choose your audience.
Errol, I'm really enjoying just being in your presence. Your energy and positivity is superb. Just on that Gartner point, how do you see AI supporting your team? Like what tools, what systems will you be using over the coming months, years to kind of enhance their productivity?
Yeah, there's a lot of opportunity there, and we're doing a lot of experimentation. I think we're in and I think a lot of organizations are going through this as well. I was speaking to an organization that did this the other day. We've got brand recognition, trust to protect. So, you can imagine that anything that we make client facing, it has to be gold standard. It has to be, ready for market. So we're doing a lot of experimentation. A lot of the things that we're working on at the moment, because we're in a knowledge industry, is knowledge summarization, classification. We've been playing with machine learning, algorithmic models for statistics and clustering of all sorts of data points and so forth for many, many years. We've got really good data science teams for that. But when it comes to like the knowledge management part of it and the customer service side of it, then we're doing a lot of testing. And for us, and we know the bad side of it. We know the bad side of these stories, that when accuracy drifts over time, and the amount of effort you need to do in order to keep that accuracy high, we can test it today, but in 3 months' time, it might start getting the answers wrong. So what is the operational procedure that we need to put in to ensure that that doesn't happen so our clients don't get a bad service? We're fortunate in a way because, Gartner's a pretty big organization now, but we've got a lot of very smart people to do a lot of customer service, customer-facing roles. So everyone feels looked after in the interim. And I think we're probably a good example of technology adoption in the sense that you drink your own champagne first, or drink your own bathwater, I suppose, is the English version of that. Getting it right, us using the tools for our own benefit, and then starting to expose it to customers. And there's comparisons of that one of the things I wanted to talk about was like the journey to like AI, where it came in conversational. Like we had chatbots doing customer service calls for ages. You know, I arrive at the website, I'm looking for a refund. You know, let me point you in the right direction. There was good bones and history of where that started, and now with generative AI, they can answer much more complicated questions with much more sophisticated answers.
With memory as well.
Yeah.
Memory is the game changer. It feels like in a lot of engagements we find that where it has contextual understanding of who you are and the conversations you've had previously, where you're not kind of resetting every time, has totally changed the usability and people's comfort with using them.
Yeah, and there's a clear business cost. I can keep calls away from my call center or my BPO. There's clear value for the customer. That's a good combination for AI adoption. That there's clear customer value, top line, bottom line growth, keeping away the costs, etc. So similarly, like at Gartner, you can see that we would use those kinds of technologies that help us in order to do a better service for our customers. And when the time becomes right, it will start to be exposed more than likely. But yeah, in a knowledge intensive industry, knowledge is our game. And we always get asked, like, does you think it'll ever replace us? And that's a difficult thing. Like as an analyst consulting type industry in general, that's a hard question to answer.
A lot of people are asking themselves that. What's the one skill you think everyone needs in this AI era to be relevant and valuable?
I think the first step is learning how to use the tools to make what you do more effective. We used to call them expert systems in computer theory, right? It was systems designed for experts, by experts, for experts to do their job better. But I think that's just the first step. The second step is like, what does that unlock? You know, because it's an intangible value that I can do my job slightly faster or better than I could before. I could take the afternoon off if I wanted as a result. It doesn't necessarily go back to Gartner's value in that sense. If any of my managers are listening, I do work in the afternoon as well. It does give me time back. But this said, what does that then enable me to do differently that I couldn't before? And that's the difficult question to answer, because we as an organization have to figure that out. I could personally figure it out, but me as an organization, what does that ultimately mean for us? And I've got a good friend who's he's an artist, independent comic book artist. And I think, fantastic talent. But obviously the generative capabilities of image and video are starting to take away from some of the differentiation that he had as a human skill and human talent. Maybe a sideline was, I can draw you as a cartoon and sell it at an event. You can now ask generative AI to do that for you. And you can make your decision whether that's higher or lesser quality, or if it's really what you're looking for. Connoisseurs will probably want the real artist to do it. But then, this is where generative AI can be helpful in that environment, that it can take time, obviously, to write different panels for each page of the book. But what if you could load in all of the backgrounds? What if you could load in that character design, and then you could do different things with your characters? Maybe you could turn it into a video for the first time without much effort. Maybe you could turn it into a 3D immersive environment. These are the sorts of capabilities that it unlocks for you without it necessarily taken away from the value that you bring. Your IP, and this is my assumption, a lot of people probably disagree with this, but your IP as an artist there is your character's design, your originality. So if you can scale that, and this is a very IT guy way of talking, right? Business consulting. If you can scale that, what more could you do? And I think that, again, that's the difficult answer, because is there value? Do people want a 3D version of this? Do they want a video of it? Or do they just want more and more comics? It doesn't apply for every industry, for every use case. But step one is, how does the capabilities that are available to you today help you become more effective, more efficient? That's the low-hanging fruit. And then if it does give you free time, or if it does help you unlock more complicated problems, how do you then turn that into an advantage? And we always used to say, it isn't the people that refuse the tool that are going to be longevity in this market. It's those that learn how to use the tools effectively. And that's true of AI, and it's true of any other tool that we have at our disposal. And I still think that that's true today. And there will be laggards and there will be leaders in this. And there's going to be some roles that exist today that won't exist in the future. But you said about that generational gap. I still think back to when I was first looking for a job. The sorts of jobs that I was applying for don't exist today anymore. And I had to adapt, I had to change. I got very lucky, don't get me wrong. But that's a hard transition in that period. And that's the one thing about history. We're always augmenting and changing. And I think when I go back to expect change, plan for agility when we talk to our customers, it's true across the board in that sense.
So listening to you speak is as inspirational as always. Honestly, Errol, I feel the same way now as I felt probably back in 2017 when we spoke. Yeah. You're hugely. There's obviously a personal passion and drive you have to identify and help people kind of traverse this emerging trend. I do think on the AI point, humans, they've always got to come up with the why.
Yeah.
And the amount of times I sit in front of even the AI tools that we're building, I don't even know what to ask it. Mm-hmm. And you need to start with a why we're doing this. And then the augmentation is now a natural thing. But humans, I think, have got to start with the why.
Yeah.
But when I've listened to you, we've talked about emerging trends, the identification, you're speaking to a huge amount of people. You come across extremely positively. And of all the people I've spoken to, to be quite frank, it's an honour to be able to speak to you today, Errol. It's been a pleasure and an honour. Utopia or dystopia?
Someone asked me once if I was an optimist, and I said, I hope so. That was a joke. No, I you know what? It's such a good question, and I was having a team
without cutting through your corporate identity, which I know you're going to be one of utopic. You come across positive and be utopic,
yeah.
But I was actually really. I mean, we haven't even got into the whole area of education. How children are being educated with it. That's not good. But really, when we think about it, where are you on this?
It has to be utopia. It has to be, because if we let the negative elements drag us down and go into this dystopian future, that's going to slow everything down. My mindset through all of this is identifying the problems early and solving them fast. That's the way that progress will happen. And if anyone's been through, like I have recently with an extension on my house, you can expect that problems are going to arise through that process. And the measure of success isn't avoiding the problems, but how quickly you can resolve the problems as they come up. And expect the unexpected in that sense. And we did do our build through COVID, which was a lot of unexpected. But that was the mantra for me personally. And I think I apply that to the outlook on life as well. Because problems will occur. Unexpected stuff that, who could have thought that, the current political climate, the current wars that we're fighting, who would have expected that 5-10 years ago? Some could claim to do that, but you have to, the known unknowns, the known knowns, all of these sorts of things. That's the thought experiment that I think is important to continue down. It's the overconfidence in the future. So not necessarily utopia because of optimism, but overconfident. It's knowing that there will be a rocky, difficult journey to get there, but we have to be honest about the problems that we could face and figure out how to solve them, rather than just putting the brakes on, which we've seen a couple of times in the industry, at least calls for it. It's because there's more benefit, I think, than there is negative on balance. Especially when you say we talked about this thing that I have in my hand in a healthcare environment that can better diagnose any ailment that you may be looking at. That is an amazing positive. Computer vision in an industrial environment saves lives because it can anticipate, it can identify threats to human danger. These are the super positive effects that we can get, de-risking those sorts of situations. And that, honestly, that's the sort of thing that keeps me happy, knowing that that is in place. And if it makes my job a little bit easier in the meantime with a bit of knowledge management, then that's all good as well.